Professor Velnara's 6 arms moved gracefully as she activated the massive holographic display that dominated the lecture hall. The crystalline projectors hummed to life, casting shimmering light across the curved walls of the amphitheater. Students from 12 different species shuffled into their hover seats, creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic vibrations that filled the air. The Galactic University of Centauri Prime buzzed with excitement. This was the semester's most anticipated class, Extinct Civilizations and Mythological Species. Today marked the beginning of their most controversial unit, the legendary Humans of Terra. In the front row, a young Zenthari student's tentacles quivered with anticipation. Behind her, a massive Corvan warrior settled his rock-like form into a reinforced seat, while delicate whisperfolk floated in their atmospheric bubbles near the ceiling. The diversity was stunning. Blue-skinned Andorians with their distinctive antennae, the insectoid Thrax with their compound eyes gleaming, and even a few of the mysterious shadow dancers who rarely left their homeworlds. Professor Velnara herself was a sight to behold. Her elongated skull housed one of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, while her pale lavender skin seemed to glow under the lecture hall's soft lighting. As the university's leading expert on dead civilizations, she had spent 3 centuries studying the rise and fall of countless species across the galaxy. "Settle down, my eager scholars," she called out, her voice carrying perfectly through the hall's acoustic dampeners. "Today we embark on perhaps the most fascinating journey into the realm of pure fantasy our galaxy has ever produced." The holographic display flickered, showing swirling images of a blue and green world orbiting a yellow star. Students leaned forward as the planet rotated slowly, revealing massive continents, vast oceans, and swirling white clouds. "Behold Terra, or as the myths call it, Earth," Velnara announced with theatrical flair. "Our so-called death world that allegedly gave birth to the most absurd mythology in our recorded history. The humans." Scattered chuckles rippled through the audience. A Rigelian student's crystalline form chimed with amusement, while several draconian cadets hissed their version of laughter. "These supposed Deathworld survivors," Velnara continued, gesturing toward the display as images of bipedal creatures appeared, "allegedly possess traits so impossible that even our best xenobiologists dismiss them as pure fiction. They supposedly could run for days without stopping, chasing prey across vast distances until their targets collapsed from exhaustion." The images showed the mythical humans in motion, long-limbed creatures moving with surprising grace across varied terrain. Their endurance seemed supernatural as the holographic simulations played out endless hunts across grasslands and forests. "But surely the most ridiculous claim," the professor said, her voice dripping with academic skepticism, "is their supposed ability to form emotional bonds with apex predators. The myths speak of humans living alongside massive carnivores they called wolves, riding creatures they named horses, and even befriending the flying death machines known as birds of prey." A Vulcarian student's ears twitched with confusion. "Professor, how could any rational species voluntarily coexist with their natural predators?" "Exactly my point," Velnara replied, warming to her topic. "But the mythology grows even more absurd. These humans allegedly threw themselves into mortal danger to save complete strangers. They supposedly possessed something called altruism, sacrificing their own survival for beings they had never met." The young Zenthari in the front row raised a tentacle, her bioluminescent patches flickering with curiosity. "Professor, surely no species could actually survive on a world with such extreme conditions. The gravity alone would crush most civilized beings." Velnara's expression grew serious as she manipulated the display to show Terra's environmental data. "Precisely why they remain firmly in the realm of fantasy, young Zaranix. Observe these readings. Gravity that would make movement exhausting for most species, atmospheric pressure that would require environmental suits, and weather patterns so violent they could kill within minutes." The display showed massive storms, frozen wastelands, scorching deserts, and other environmental hazards that made the students' homeworlds seem like paradise gardens. Yet the myths claim humans not only survived, but thrived in these conditions. The professor continued. "They allegedly developed something called endurance hunting, pursuing prey for dozens of kilometers until exhaustion claimed their targets. Note the supposed biomechanical efficiency. Their myths speak of cooling systems that allowed continuous exertion through liquid secretion. Several students made disgusted sounds at the concept of sweating, their own species finding the idea a revolting. And then we have their most fantastical trait, Velnara said, her voice taking on an almost mocking tone. Pack bonding behavior so extreme they supposedly adopted other species as family members. Imagine a rational being choosing to care for a creature that serves no logical purpose simply because of emotional attachment. The Corvan warrior in the third row rumbled thoughtfully. Such behavior would be a severe evolutionary disadvantage. Why waste resources on non-productive companions? Exactly the question that proves these humans never existed, the professor replied triumphantly. No species could survive the cutthroat reality of evolution while burdened by such irrational emotional responses. As laughter and agreement rippled through the classroom, none of them noticed the distant rumble growing louder outside the university's walls. Something was approaching Centauri Prime at tremendous speed, and it was heading directly for their peaceful academic world. The emergency klaxons shattered the peaceful atmosphere like a hammer through crystal. Their piercing wail echoed through the lecture hall's curved walls, causing students to cover their various auditory organs in distress. Red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow as the university's defense systems activated automatically. Professor Velnara's 4 eyes darted toward the massive transparent aluminum windows that offered a perfect view of the university courtyard. What she saw made her heart skip several beats. Her sleek spacecraft, trailing smoke and sparks, was plummeting toward the manicured gardens below at a terrifying speed. The vessel was unlike anything in their databases, streamlined and purposeful, with strange markings along its hull that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. Its engines screamed in protest as the pilot fought desperately to control their descent. Chunks of debris scattered across the sky like metallic rain. Everyone remained calm, Velnara called out, though her own voice trembled with excitement and fear. Students pressed against the windows, their various forms creating a bizarre tapestry of curiosity and concern. The spacecraft hit the courtyard with a tremendous crash that shook the entire building. Ancient Corvan statues toppled over, and the university's prized crystal fountain exploded into 1,000 glittering fragments. Steam hissed from the wreckage as emergency foam sprayed automatically from hidden nozzles. Within seconds, the university's security response kicked into high gear. Sleek silver drones emerged from hidden compartments, their sensors scanning for threats as they swarmed around the crash site. Larger security mechs stomped across the courtyard, their heavy footsteps leaving cracks in the decorative stonework. "Alert, alert," announced the university's AI system in 12 different languages. "Unidentified vessel has made emergency landing. All students must remain in designated safe areas until threat assessment is complete." But nobody was paying attention to the warnings. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ was focused on the smoking wreckage. The spacecraft's hull was cracked and twisted, revealing glimpses of advanced technology that sparked with damaged energy conduits. Then, something impossible happened. The vessel's airlock hissed open with a rush of escaping atmosphere. Through the smoke and steam, 3 figures emerged. They moved with purpose despite obvious injuries, and their silhouettes were unmistakably familiar to everyone who had just been studying mythological creatures. "By the void," Professor Velnara whispered, her 4 eyes widening until they threatened to pop from her skull. "Those look exactly like..." The lead figure was clearly male by the mythological standards they had just been discussing. He stood approximately 2 meters tall with the lean build described in the ancient texts. His dark hair was disheveled from the crash, and a small cut on his forehead leaked the red liquid that myths claimed flowed through human veins. Captain Li Jiho shook his head to clear it, then immediately turned to check on his crew. His movements were exactly as the legends described, quick, efficient, and focused entirely on the welfare of others rather than his own obvious injuries. "Minji, are you hurt?" he called out in a language the universal translators struggled to process. Lieutenant Park Minji, the female pilot, was pulling herself from the wreckage with determination that defied her smaller frame. Her flight suit was torn and burn marks showed where electrical discharge had nearly caught her during the crash. "I'm fine, Captain," she replied, though she favored her left leg. Do-hyun took the worst of it when the navigation console exploded. Technician Kim Do-hyun emerged last, his engineer's uniform singed and dirty. He carried what appeared to be their emergency supplies, a heavy pack that would have challenged most species, yet he hefted it easily despite nursing an obviously injured arm. The security drones circled warily, their weapons systems armed but confused. These beings matched no known hostile species in the galactic database. More puzzling still, they showed no aggressive behavior despite having just survived a traumatic crash. Instead, Captain Lee immediately began distributing supplies to the approaching alien medical teams. He handed over emergency medical kits, water purification tablets, and even his own emergency beacon, technology that could have ensured their rescue, but which he gave freely to strangers. Lieutenant Park spotted a young Zenthari security officer who had been injured by flying debris. Without hesitation, she limped over and began applying basic first aid using human techniques. Her hands moved with practiced skill as she bandaged the alien's wounds, speaking softly in soothing tones that transcended language barriers. Technician Kim, meanwhile, had somehow produced a multi-tool and was already helping to repair one of the damaged security drones. His fingers worked with impossible precision, fixing alien technology he had never seen before, through pure intuition and mechanical understanding. The behavior was exactly as the myths described: immediate concern for others, rapid adaptation to crisis situations, and inexplicable generosity toward complete strangers. They had just crashed on an unknown world, yet their first instinct was to help rather than seek help. The classroom behind the windows erupted into chaos. Students spoke in dozen different languages simultaneously, creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, harmonic vibrations, and electronic beeps. Some species communicated through color changes, turning the room into a shifting rainbow of excitement and disbelief. "Impossible," breathed a Rigelian student, his crystalline form chiming with agitation. "The myths are walking around down there. Look at their movements," whispered a Draconian cadet. "They move exactly like the simulations showed. But they're real." Professor Velnara stood frozen, watching as everything she had taught for centuries crumbled before her eyes. These were not myths or legends or ancient fantasies. These were living, breathing humans, and they were exactly as impossible as the stories claimed. The news traveled faster than light itself through the university's quantum communication networks. Within minutes of the crash, emergency broadcasts were pinging across star systems, carried by subspace relays that connected every corner of the sector. The message was simple but earth-shattering. Living humans had been found. Academic stations throughout the galaxy lit up with activity as professors, researchers, and xenobiologists dropped everything they were doing. Transport ships launched from dozens of worlds, their crews desperate to witness what many believed was an elaborate hoax. But the evidence kept streaming in through live feeds, sensor data, and first-hand accounts that couldn't be faked. The university's medical bay became the center of galactic attention. Dr. Thisakara, the chief medical officer, was a healer from the Andromeda colonies, a species known for their medical expertise across 3 galaxies. Her tentacled form moved gracefully between monitoring stations as she observed the most fascinating patients she had ever encountered. "The readings are impossible," she muttered to her assistant, a young Corvan named Drakmol whose rocky exterior hid a brilliant medical mind. "Their cellular regeneration rate is 3 times faster than any known species. Look at this wound. Healing. It's knitting itself back together in real time." On the medical scanner, Captain Lee's forehead cut was visibly closing. The torn flesh was pulling together naturally, requiring no synthetic skin grafts or cellular accelerators. His body was doing in hours what would take other species days or weeks to accomplish, but the physical healing was only part of the mystery. When Dr. Thisakara had attempted to administer standard pain suppressants, all 3 humans had politely but firmly refused. "They insist on staying conscious," the doctor reported to the growing crowd of observers. The female, Lieutenant Park, says they need to help with translation protocols. The male engineer, Kim, claims he can fix our equipment better while awake, and their captain refuses any medication that might slow his ability to communicate with our staff. This behavior baffled the medical team. Every known species accepted pain relief when offered. Pain was evolution's warning system, but it served no purpose once medical care was available. Yet these humans seemed to embrace discomfort, if it meant they could be more helpful to others. Lieutenant Park had become the medical bay's unofficial ambassador. Despite her injured leg, she moved from bed to bed, offering comfort to other patients in the facility. Her broken universal was improving by the hour as she absorbed new words and phrases with remarkable speed. "No worry," she told a young Zenthari, who was recovering from appendage surgery. "Healing happens soon, you strong like mountain." Her words were simple, but her tone carried such genuine warmth that the patient's bioluminescent patches began glowing with contentment. The medical staff watched in amazement as she demonstrated human first aid techniques. Using nothing but basic supplies, she showed them pressure point methods for stopping bleeding, splinting techniques that required no advanced materials, and breathing exercises that could manage pain without drugs. "Fascinating," whispered Dr. Thisakara. "She's teaching us medical procedures that our databases don't contain. Simple techniques that are somehow more effective than our advanced methods." Meanwhile, Technician Kim had turned his recovery bed into an impromptu repair station. Despite his injured arm being in a regeneration sleeve, he had somehow convinced the medical staff to bring him 3 pieces of broken equipment. Using tools improvised from medical instruments, he was systematically fixing devices that had been scheduled for replacement. "How does he understand Corvan bioscanners when he's never seen our technology?" asked Drakmol, watching Kim's fingers dance across unfamiliar circuits. "He's not even using a technical manual." "Pattern recognition," Kim explained through the universal translator, which was still struggling with human language nuances. "Machine logic, same everywhere. Energy flow, data pathways, system feedback, universal concepts. Just need to see how pieces connect." As he spoke, the bioscanner hummed back to life, its displays showing perfect calibration readings. The medical team stared in disbelief as he moved on to a broken atmospheric processor, his intuitive understanding of alien technology defying every law of xenopsychology. But it was Captain Lee who drew the most attention. Professor Velnara found him in the medical bay's common area, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside a small creature that was clearly terrified. The being was a student from Proxima Centauri, a species known for their extreme shyness around unfamiliar life forms. The young Proximan was curled into a tight ball, its fur-like covering bristled with anxiety. Emergency medical protocols had brought it in for treatment of panic-induced cardiac stress, but no amount of medication seemed to calm its fears. Lee sat perfectly still beside the creature, speaking in broken universal, while slowly unwrapping one of his emergency rations. His voice was soft and non-threatening, filled with the kind of patience that could only come from genuine caring. "Small friend need food energy," he said gently, offering a piece of what appeared to be compressed nutrition. "Human food, maybe. Tastes strange but gives strength for healing. Lee promise. No harm come to small friend." The Proximan's large eyes gradually opened, drawn by the unfamiliar scents and the soothing tone. With trembling appendages, it accepted the offered food. Within minutes, its panic symptoms began subsiding as Lee continued his quiet conversation, sharing stories about Earth's smaller creatures and how humans had learned to care for them. Medical. Staff watched in wonder as this supposedly mythological being demonstrated the exact pack-bonding behavior described in ancient texts. He had no logical reason to care for a stranger from another species, yet he invested his own recovery time in providing comfort to a frightened child. Professor Velnara approached cautiously, her academic mind reeling from everything she had witnessed. These beings were rewriting everything she thought she knew about evolution, psychology, and the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. "Captain," she said softly, not wanting to disturb his work with the young Proximan, Would you speak to my class about humans?" Lee looked up with eyes that seemed much older than his apparent age. Despite the exhaustion written across his features, despite his own injuries and the trauma of their crash, his expression held nothing but kindness and genuine curiosity. "We'd be honored, Professor," he replied, his improving universal carrying. Subtle warmth that the translator couldn't quite capture. "Though I think your textbooks might need some updating." Around them, the medical bay hummed with activity, as beings from across the galaxy continued arriving. But in that moment, surrounded by the impossible reality of living humans, Professor Velnara realized that everything she thought she knew about the universe had just changed forever. The great auditorium of Centauri Prime had never seen anything like it. Built to accommodate the galaxy's largest academic gatherings, the massive space now overflowed with beings who had traveled impossible distances in record time. Ships from every corner of the sector crowded the university's landing bays, their crews desperate to witness the impossible. Representatives from the Rigelian crystal communes floated in their environmental spheres, their forms chiming with anticipation. Draconian military observers perched on specially reinforced platforms, their scaled hides gleaming under the auditorium's lights. Even the mysterious shadow dancers had emerged from their hidden realms, their dark forms rippling at the edges of perception. The curved walls of the auditorium stretched upward for hundreds of meters, lined with viewing platforms that accommodated every conceivable form of alien anatomy. Tentacled beings hung from ceiling attachments, while rock-based lifeforms settled into reinforced floor sections. The air itself hummed with translation frequencies as dozens of languages prepared to convert human speech into forms their respective species could understand. Captain Lee Ji-ho stood at the center of it all, a single human figure surrounded by thousands of alien minds. His simple flight suit looked almost primitive compared to the advanced technologies surrounding him, yet every sensor in the room was focused on his calm presence. Lieutenant Park Min-ji and Technician Kim Do-yun flanked him, their own quiet. Confidence radiating outward like a protective field, the silence was deafening, as Lee raised his hand in a simple gesture of greeting. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the auditorium's acoustic systems, reaching every corner of the vast space. "We're not myths," he began, his words causing a ripple of electronic translations across the gathering. "We're just people who learn to survive on a difficult world. Earth taught us that tomorrow might be better if we help each other today." His statement seemed almost anticlimactic after all the build-up, yet something in his tone made every being lean forward. This wasn't the voice of a legend or a deity. It was the voice of someone who had lived through real struggles and found real solutions. "Let me show you what human endurance really means," Lee continued, beginning a slow, steady walk across the presentation platform. "On Earth, our ancestors had to travel great distances to find food, water, and safety. We developed the ability to keep moving when other predators would tire." As he spoke, Lee maintained his walking pace without pause. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2 hours, as he continued his presentation while moving. His breathing remained steady, his voice clear, and his steps consistent. Other species would have been gasping for air or demanding rest breaks, but Lee simply kept going. "This isn't magic," he explained as he walked. "It's adaptation. Our planet taught us that stopping often meant dying, so we learned to keep moving. Until we reached safety." The audience watched in fascination as sweat began to appear on his skin, the mythical cooling system they had heard about in legends. Rather than being disgusted, they found themselves amazed by the efficiency of biological temperature regulation that required no external technology. Lieutenant Park stepped forward, her injured leg barely slowing her movement. "Human pattern. Recognition comes from survival necessity," she announced, accepting a data pad from Professor Velnara. "When your life depends on reading weather patterns, animal behavior, and terrain features, your brain learns to process complex information quickly." The device displayed the university's most challenging navigation puzzle, a three-dimensional maze of stellar coordinates, gravitational fields, and temporal anomalies that typically took graduate students weeks to solve. Park studied it for exactly 4 minutes, her eyes tracking invisible connections and relationships. Solution pathway requires micro-jumps through the Vega debris field, using the binary pulsar's gravity well for course correction and timing. The final approach during the solar minimum, she announced, inputting her solution. The auditorium's main display confirmed her answer as completely correct. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd as beings realized they had just witnessed computational abilities that rivaled their most advanced AI systems. Technician Kim approached a group of linguistic specialists in the front row. "Human. Adaptability isn't supernatural," he said, addressing a collection of scholars who represented 12 different language families. "We survived by learning to communicate with other tribes, other species, and eventually other worlds." What happened? Next left the entire auditorium speechless. Kim began conversing with the Zenthari delegation in their complex bioluminescent language, having somehow absorbed their communication patterns during the 2-hour presentation. He switched seamlessly to Corvan rumble speak, then to the harmonic, frequencies used by the whisper folk. "How?" demanded Dr. Zenthara, the galaxy's leading expert in xenolinguistics. "Language acquisition requires years of study, neural pathway development, cultural context absorption." Kim smiled, an expression that somehow translated across every species in the room. "When you grow up on a world where failure to communicate means death, you learn to listen very carefully to everything around you. Your brain becomes wired for pattern recognition, cultural adaptation, and rapid learning." Captain Lee had completed his circuit of the auditorium and returned to center stage, still walking, still speaking clearly. "Humans don't bond with others because we're special," he said, his voice carrying a weight of absolute truth. "We bond because we learned that together, we're stronger than apart." He gestured toward his crew, who had moved closer to form their characteristic protective triangle. "When storms came, we sheltered together. When predators attacked, we fought together. When food was scarce, we shared what we had. Cooperation wasn't just nice, it was necessary for survival. That's why we explore space," Lieutenant Park added, her voice soft but clear. "Not to conquer worlds or claim resources, but to find friends among the stars. Every new species we meet is a potential ally, a source of new ideas, a chance to learn something that might help us all survive together." The auditorium fell into absolute silence as the implications hit home. Professor Velnara felt her worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself in real time. These weren't myths or legends or impossible beings. They were exactly what they claimed to be, survivors who had learned that kindness was the ultimate survival trait. "The ancient texts," she whispered, her voice carrying through the hall's acoustics. "They weren't mythology at all. They were historical records, mistranslated, misunderstood, but real." Captain Lee nodded, finally stopping his 2-hour demonstration of endurance. "We've been exploring the outer rim for decades, helping where we could, learning from everyone we met. We never announced ourselves because we didn't want to disrupt existing civilizations." He looked out over the vast gathering of alien minds, his expression warm with genuine affection. "But maybe it's time the galaxy knew that humans aren't myths. We're just neighbors who believe that tomorrow can be better if we all work together to make it happen." The applause that followed wasn't just sound. It was a symphony of approval that crossed every species barrier, proving that some truths truly were universal. The emergency session of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 standard days, with representatives from over 200 star systems participating through quantum communication links. The massive chamber on Nexus Prime hummed with tension as legislators, military commanders, and scientific advisors debated humanity's sudden emergence into galactic society. Admiral Korthvex of the Draconian Fleet paced before the central podium, his scaled form casting long shadows under the chamber's ceremonial lighting. "The implications are staggering," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had defended the galaxy for 3 centuries. "These humans have been operating in our space for decades without detection. Their stealth capabilities alone represent a potential security threat." But Counter-Admiral Thisana of the Rigelian Collective disagreed, her crystalline form chiming with musical tones. "The evidence shows only beneficial contact. 17 documented cases of human assistance during natural disasters, 43 instances of technical aid to stranded vessels, and not a single recorded act of aggression or territorial expansion.